Welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at, does the US spend too much money on military? It's something that I've seen come up quite a bit recently, and I want to address it. Specifically, I've heard the claim that the US spends more than 50% of its budget on the military. And that is, it's just not right. That's inaccurate. It's false. So I want to show you that I've seen this claim just twice in the past week. First on Facebook, on a conservative page that I'm following, someone commented on one of the posts and said this: over 50% of our taxes go to the military. A small percentage go toward entitlements. A lot of people don't know this. So apparently, we spend more on the military than we do on entitlements. Okay, for another example, after my last video, which was about the wealth tax, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and how they want to just tax everybody for everything, basically, I posted that video on a capitalism Reddit page. And it was fairly well received because it was a page about capitalism. But there were a few people who didn't appreciate it. So in response to someone saying they would be okay with increased taxes if spending was cut and more regulated, I said the following: I agree we have a huge spending problem and we need to cut it. The problem is most of our spending is in social programs that Democrats want to expand, so I don't see that coming, referring to if one of the Democrats were elected president. And that seems fairly logical to me. I felt like it wasn't really a position that anyone could argue against, but apparently I was wrong. See, in comes the madman flies. He comes flying over, and this is how he responds to my, what I thought was fairly logical comment. I think you need to look at the budget again. Over half of our expenses are in the military, which is bloated. Again, here we see the same claim that over half of our spending is in the military. He continues, and most of those social programs like welfare go to big corporations and the rich. So I didn't know this, but according to him, rich people qualify for welfare, like EBT and food stamps. So I guess the rich people like Bill Gates really need their food stamps, huh? And here's the real kicker, the reason I decided to actually show this post here in this video. Do some research before you start spouting off nonsense. So the guy who says that rich people are on welfare is accusing me of spouting off nonsense talking about the budget. So that just kind of pushed me over the edge, and I wanted to put him in here and explain why this is completely inaccurate. Now, if you are under the impression currently that half of our budget is in the military, I'm not necessarily blaming you. That guy, Madman Flies, was a jerk, so yeah, I'm calling him out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are not informed. It just means you're informed incorrectly. You see, if you do a simple image search for US military spending or US military spending chart or something of that nature, you'll see things like this. These are a bunch of pie charts, and most of the pie charts have that military spending is at least half, if not more, of the pie chart. For example, if we look at this one specifically, we see that military is $600 billion and accounts for 54% of the entirety of this pie chart. So the assumption is this pie chart is talking about the entirety of the budget. However, that is not accurate. Oftentimes, those on the left and the media show things like this to make it seem like we spend a huge amount of money on the military, which, don't get me wrong, $600 billion is a lot of money, but it's not nearly as large a percentage as they're trying to make it seem. Because if you look up, you see that this is just discretionary spending. And an ounce more of research will show you that discretionary spending actually only represents 30% of the entire federal budget. We have 10%, which is debt, which kind of sucks. We have to work on that. But then we also have 60%. The majority of the budget, as we see here very clearly, goes to mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, i.e. entitlement programs. So it is obvious and evident, looking at the real data, that we do spend significantly more on entitlement programs. To put that in perspective a little bit more, we find that on the mandatory spending, we spend $2.8 trillion every single year. Now, mandatory spending is different from discretionary spending because mandatory spending, as the name implies, is mandatory. All that means is that every single year, we have to spend the amount of mandatory spending governed by how many people are on these programs, and Congress doesn't really have a choice. The reason that we've had a few government shutdowns in the past, decade, have been because of disagreements with discretionary spending. And that is what Congress has to decide and allocate, which has to be, again, approved by the president and things like that. So discretionary spending is what we hear about year to year because that is what can affect if we have a shutdown and how much goes where, but that is completely ignoring the 60% that already went automatically to these entitlement programs. I want to emphasize that this is the reason it's really, really important not to just believe everything you read or see on the internet, because you could look at the sources that we already did that show military spending at 50 or 54% and think that's it, that's the end. But that's not accurate. And that is why in all of my videos, I give you all the sources I use down below. I'm not asking you to believe me. If you want, and I encourage you to, go look them up, check out my sources and see if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, let me know. I'm not, but you can let me know anyway. That's the important thing about being an educated voter, is being informed on things like this, which is why I'm doing these videos. If you were under the impression that it was 50% of our entire budget, I'm not hating on you, I'm not looking down on you, I'm just saying, here's the real information. Hopefully you are more informed now in the future. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about military spending in general, because we looked at mandatory spending, which was $2.8 trillion, compared to the defense budget, which is $600 billion. So it's not even a fourth. Now, $600 billion is still a lot of money, don't get me wrong. Nowhere near as much as 2.8 trillion, but it's still a lot of money. And I support the military. I don't want to cut it. I don't want to cut it in half. I think we need to have a strong military. But I also think it's important to be smart in how we spend and not just spend for spending's sake. What I mean by this is there is waste in the military. There's really no way to deny that. If you have been in the military or you've talked to people who have, they have stories about just leaving things where they were because it would be too difficult to move it and things of that nature. But to show you what I mean with actual facts, because anecdotal evidence is irrelevant, here we have a report that supposedly showed $125 billion of waste in the military. But the report was squashed by the Pentagon because they didn't want to lose that much money for the next year. This is basically a surplus. You have to use it for something, or else the company will see that and not give you that much money next year. Kind of reminds me of what happened in The Office with Michael and the surplus, because The Office is one of the best TV shows around. You can fight me on that. Anyway, what I'm saying here is not that we need to cut spending, but that we need to focus our spending and be more efficient. There's no point spending just to spend money. It needs to be smart spending, and it needs to be well done. So there are places we can improve on the military. That being said, it is not even close to 54% of our total budget. So if you hear that claim again, you now have sources you can go to show them wrong, and hopefully they'll change their mind. More likely they'll just block you on Facebook, because that's what people do nowadays. How much did you think we spent on the military before you saw this video? Were you aware that it was only like 15% of our budget? Did you think it was more like 50%? Let me know down below. And hopefully now you have the real information that you can actually change your mind if you thought it was 50%. As always, thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because I always provide information and sources like this, and I think most people prefer to be informed. So that's what I'm trying to do in this channel. Check out one of these other videos you may have missed, and I'll be sure to see you next time.